Redbend, Texas, in the late spring of 1884, was not a place that welcomed a man softly, nor did it offer comfort to a man who possessed nothing but the clothes on his back and the calluses on his hands. It was a town built of hard edges and baked clay, where the wind carried the sharp, ceaseless scent of dry sage and the abrasive grit of the open plains, settling deep into the grain of the false front buildings and into the deep lines of every man's face. The sun beat down on the wide dirt thoroughfare with a steady, unforgiving weight, bleaching the wooden boardwalks to the color of old bone and baking the mud of the spring rains into treacherous, ankle-turning ruts. Jesse Cole had been breathing that dry, dusty air for 4 long days. 4 days of walking those sun-bleached wooden boardwalks. 4 days of asking after honest work at the livery stable, the general store, the freight office, and the assayer's door. 4 days of hearing the exact same slow, apologetic drawl, telling him that times were currently lean, that the herds were thin, and that the ranch hands were already full up for the season. He was a man entirely accustomed to the lean times. He carried his entire life in a canvas bedroll and a pair of worn leather saddlebags, his boots worn thin at the heel from miles of walking, his hands hardened from a dozen different practical trades in a dozen different unforgiving territories. He was not a man who panicked, for panic was a useless expenditure of energy, but the heavy coins in his pocket were now reduced to exactly 3 copper pennies and a single silver dime, and a man, no matter how sturdy or how quiet, could not eat the wind. He stood in the narrow sliver of shade cast by the awning of the feed and seed store. His weight shifted onto one hip, his thumbs hooked loosely into his belt, watching the slow, lethargic movement of the town before him. He was a tall man, built with the lean, functional muscle of a lifetime spent in physical labor, his shoulders broad under a faded cotton shirt, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn felt hat. He possessed a stillness that often made people forget he was standing there, a quiet, observant nature that took in the details of the world without feeling the immediate need to comment upon them. He watched a stray dog trot diagonally across the street, its tongue lolling. He watched a pair of women in heavy wool skirts navigate the dusty crossing, their parasols tilted against the blinding glare. And then he watched an old man. The old man was struggling. He was positioned beside a heavy, flatbed wagon parked near the loading dock of the feed store, attempting to heave a massive, overstuffed burlap sack of horse oats into the back. The man was easily in his late 60s, his hair completely white under his hat, his face weathered into a map of deep creases, his frame still broad but clearly lacking the raw, youthful strength required for the task. The wagon was situated awkwardly. The rear wheels sunk deep into a dried mud rut, causing the bed to tilt at a difficult angle. The old man strained, his boots slipping in the loose dust, the heavy burlap sack catching on the rough timber of the wagon gate, threatening to spill its contents into the dirt. He grunted, a sound of profound frustration and failing leverage, his knuckles white as he gripped the coarse fabric. Jesse did not think. He did not announce himself. He simply pushed off from the wooden post of the awning and crossed the dusty street in 4 long, measured strides. He stepped up beside the old man, slid his large hands under the bottom of the burlap sack, and took the entirety of the dead weight into his own shoulders. With a smooth, practiced upward thrust, born of years spent loading freight and building fences and shifting earth, Jesse hoisted the heavy sack up and over the wooden gate, settling it gently onto the floorboards of the wagon bed. He did not wait for a word of thanks. He merely turned his back, walked over to the loading dock where 3 more identical sacks sat waiting in the harsh sun, hoisted the nearest one onto his right shoulder, and carried it to the wagon. The old man stepped back, pulling a checkered handkerchief from his pocket and wiping the heavy sweat from his brow, watching in absolute silence as Jesse worked. Jesse moved with a steady, rhythmic efficiency. He lifted the second sack, carried it, placed it squarely beside the first. He returned for the third. The air was thick with the smell of dry dust, of sweet oats, of hot harness leather, and of the faint, sharp tang of liniment. Jesse did not speak, and the old man did not speak, and the work was finished in a matter of minutes. When the final sack was securely in place, Jesse adjusted the tailgate, dropped the iron latch into its slot, and turned to walk away, fully intending to resume his quiet vigil in the shade of the awning. The old man cleared his throat. "Hold on a minute, son," he said. His voice was gravelly, deep, and carried the undeniable authority of a man who was entirely used to being listened to. Jesse stopped and turned back, his face completely neutral, his eyes steady under the brim of his hat. The old man was looking him over. It was not a casual glance. It was a thorough, piercing assessment, the sharp gaze of a man who had been reading people, horses, and weather for 60 years. He looked at the breadth of Jesse's shoulders, the worn state of his boots, the calluses on his hands, and the calm, unhurried way Jesse met his eyes. The old man nodded slowly, as if confirming a private suspicion. "You are looking for work," he stated. It was not a question. "I am," Jesse said. His voice was low, carrying the same quiet steadiness as his posture. The old man folded his handkerchief and tucked it back into his vest pocket. "I am Thomas Hale. I have a ranch 3 miles out on the North Road. I need a man to run a new fence line along the eastern ridge. The ground is hardpan and limestone, and it is miserable work. I will pay you $2 a day, plus your midday meal." Thomas Hale paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he continued to study Jesse's impassive face. "And," Thomas added, his tone shifting into something entirely unexpected, something uncomfortably direct, "you would make a fine husband for my daughter." A pause. Jesse stared at him. The wind kicked up a small swirl of dust between them, rattling the wooden sign hanging above the store. Jesse did not blink. He processed the words, turning them over in his mind, searching for the joke, for the trap, for the hidden meaning. He found nothing but the blunt, unvarnished truth in the old man's weathered face. Jesse was a man who took the world exactly as it presented itself, but this was a complication he had not anticipated. He looked at the wagon, he looked at the sacks of grain, and he looked back at Thomas Hale. "I will take the fencing work, Mr. Hale," Jesse said evenly, entirely ignoring the second half of the statement. "I can start tomorrow morning." Thomas Hale let out a short, dry bark of laughter. It was a sound of genuine amusement. 7 o'clock, Thomas said. "Bring your own gloves. The wire will tear your hands to pieces if you let it." Jesse nodded once, touched the brim of his hat, and walked away. He had a job. He had $2 a day. He had a reason to stay in Redbend. The rest of the old man's words he filed away as the eccentric rambling of a man who had spent too much time in the sun. He bought a small loaf of bread and a piece of hard cheese with his remaining coins, slept in the livery loft by the grace of the stable master, and woke before dawn. The walk to the Hale ranch took an hour. The morning air was cool and crisp, the sky shifting from deep violet to a pale, bruised pink along the eastern horizon. The landscape was vast and empty, a rolling expanse of scrub brush and tough prairie grass, broken only by the occasional jutting ridge of pale limestone. Jesse walked with a steady, ground-eating stride, his mind focused entirely on the practicalities of the task ahead. Digging post holes in hardpan required patience. Stringing barbed wire required precision. He was comfortable with patience and precision. He was comfortable with tasks that had a clear beginning, a clear middle, and a clear, satisfying end. He arrived at the main house exactly at 7 o'clock. It was a solid, well-built structure of whitewashed timber, sitting squarely in a grove of ancient cottonwood trees that provided a deep, welcoming shade. A large barn stood to the right, a corral to the left. The place smelled of wood smoke, of damp earth, and of strong brewing coffee. Jesse walked up to the back porch and knocked twice on the heavy wooden door. The door opened. It was not Thomas Hale. It was a woman, She was perhaps 27 years old, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, practical knot at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple, unadorned dress of dark blue cotton, covered by a white canvas apron dusted lightly with flour. She was not conventionally beautiful in the soft, fragile way that the magazines back east praised. Her face was too strong for that, her jaw too defined, her eyes too sharp. She possessed a fierce, intelligent capability that radiated from her very posture. She held a heavy cast-iron coffee pot in one hand, a steaming tin cup in the other, and she looked at Jessie with an expression of profound, weary resignation. This was Ada Hale. She was the local schoolteacher, a woman who read thick volumes of history by lamplight, a woman who could mend a harness, balance a ledger, and dress a wound with equal, unflinching competence. And she was a woman who was entirely, fiercely uninterested in being any man's arrangement. She knew exactly why this stranger was standing on her back porch. Her father was not a subtle man. Over the past 3 years, Thomas Hale had quietly, persistently steered 3 different men toward her kitchen door. The first had been a prosperous merchant from town, a man who spoke only of his growing bank accounts and looked at Ada as if she were a particularly sturdy piece of furniture to be acquired. She had sent him away. The second had been a neighboring rancher, a widower who needed a mother for his wild children and a cook for his crew. She had sent him away. The third had been a young, ambitious clerk who wanted a woman to manage his entire life while he dreamed of political office. She had sent him away with a lecture that left his ears burning. Now, here was the fourth. A drifter, a man with dust on his boots and silence in his eyes. Ada took a sip of her coffee, her gaze never leaving Jessie's face. "You are the new fence builder," she stated flatly. "Yes, ma'am," Jessie said, removing his hat. "Jessie Cole, your father told me to be here at 7. My father is currently in the barn, pretending to examine a horse's hoof while he waits to see how long it takes for me to throw you off this porch," Ada said, her voice sharp and completely devoid of pleasantries. She stepped out onto the porch, closing the door slightly behind her. "Let us save everyone a great deal of time, Mr. Cole. I know exactly what my father said to you in town yesterday. He is a meddler, and he believes that a woman of 27 is a tragedy that needs to be solved. I am entirely capable of making my own coffee, managing my own life, and reading my own books. I do not need a husband. I do not want an arrangement, and I will not be maneuvered into a courtship by a man who thinks he can buy my compliance with a day wage. Do we understand each other?" She stared at him, her chin raised, her eyes flashing with a defensive, practiced defiance. She was waiting for the argument. She was waiting for the placating smile, the patronizing chuckle, the attempt to charm or dominate her. She had seen it all before. Jessie looked at her. He looked at the way she held the heavy iron pot with effortless strength. He looked at the ink stain on the side of her right index finger. He looked at the fierce, guarded intelligence in her eyes. He did not smile. He did not chuckle. He simply nodded, a slow, solemn dip of his head. "Understood," Jessie said. He put his hat back on, turned, and walked toward the barn. Ada stood frozen on the porch. The steam from her coffee curled into the cool morning air. She watched his broad back as he walked away. She had been waiting 3 years to hear a man simply say that word and mean it. No argument. No persuasion. Just a simple, profound acceptance of her boundary. She frowned, a small, confused crease appearing between her brows, and took another sip of her coffee. The work began, and the work was brutal. The eastern ridge was exactly as Thomas Hale had described it. A miserable stretch of unforgiving hard-pan dirt laced with thick veins of stubborn limestone. Digging a single post hole required breaking the surface with a heavy iron spud bar, scooping out the shattered dirt with a post hole digger, and repeating the agonizing process until the hole was 3 feet deep. The Texas sun climbed high and hot, baking the earth and turning the air into a shimmering haze. Jesse worked with a relentless, rhythmic intensity. He drove the heavy iron bar down. He lifted it. He drove it down again. The sound of iron striking stone echoed across the empty ridge, a steady, solitary heartbeat in the vast silence. He was supposed to build 2 miles of fence. Thomas Hale had estimated the job would take 2 weeks, assuming a man cut corners, spaced the posts wide, and didn't bother to brace the corners properly. Jesse Cole did not cut corners. It was not in his nature. A fence was a promise made to the land, and Jesse believed in keeping promises. He sourced the best cedar posts from the distant timber stand. He spent days peeling the bark so the wood would cure properly and resist the rot. He dug every hole to the exact depth required, tamping the dirt back down with the heavy end of the spud bar until the posts stood as rigid as iron. He strung the vicious barbed wire tight, using a block and tackle to pull the tension until the wire sang like a plucked fiddle string when struck. 2 weeks stretched into 3. 3 weeks stretched into 4. And during those long, grueling weeks, a quiet, unspoken rhythm developed between the drifter and the schoolteacher. Ada Hale was a woman of routine. Every morning at 8 o'clock, she saddled her small mare and rode the 4 miles into Redbend to teach the town's children. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, she returned. From the elevated position of the eastern ridge, Jesse could see the road. He found himself pausing in his work, leaning on the handle of his shovel, watching the small figure on horseback moving steadily across the vast landscape. He watched the way she rode, her back straight, her hands light on the reins. He watched until she disappeared into the trees near the house, and only then did he return to his labor. Ada, too, found herself watching. Her kitchen window faced the eastern ridge. While she prepared the evening meal, she would look out across the distance and see the solitary figure of Jesse Cole, a dark silhouette against the fading sky, still working, still driving the iron bar, still pulling the wire. She noticed the immaculate straightness of his fence line. She noticed that he never stopped to rest in the shade, never took a shortcut, never left a tool out in the weather overnight. The interactions between them were sparse, confined entirely to the midday meal. Thomas Hale, true to his word, provided lunch. Often Thomas brought it out himself, sitting on a stump and talking endlessly about cattle prices and the weather while Jesse ate in silence. But occasionally, Thomas was occupied, and Ada was the one who walked out to the ridge carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. The first time she brought the food, she expected awkwardness. She expected him to try and initiate the courtship her father desired. She walked up to the fence line, the basket heavy on her arm. Jesse saw her coming. He stopped working immediately. He drove the shovel deep into the dirt, wiped his hands on his canvas trousers, and walked over to meet her. "My father is in town," Ada said, holding out the basket. Her voice was brisk, defensive. "Cold chicken and biscuits." Jesse took the basket. "Thank you, ma'am." He sat down on a pile of cured cedar posts. She stood there, unsure if she should leave or wait for the basket. He opened the cloth, took out a biscuit, and began to eat. He did not stare at her. He did not make small talk. He simply ate, his focus quietly resting on the horizon. Ada watched him. "You are digging them very deep," she observed, gesturing toward the freshly set posts. Jesse swallowed. He looked at the posts. "The wind blows hard coming down off the high plains," he said softly. "A shallow post will lean after the first heavy rain. A leaning fence is worse than no fence at all." Ada looked at the fence line. It was perfectly, mathematically straight. "My father said it would take 2 weeks. You have been here almost a month." "Your father wants it done fast," Jesse replied, taking a bite of the chicken. "I want it done right. I am charging him the same total price we agreed upon for the 2 weeks. The extra time is mine to spend." Ada stared at him, genuinely surprised. "You are working for free?" "I am working for the fence," Jesse corrected gently. He looked up at her, his eyes clear and calm. "A man's work is his name, Miss Hale. I will not leave a crooked line across your land just to save myself a few days of sweat." He did not say it to impress her. He said it because it was a simple, immutable fact of his existence. Ada felt a strange quiet settling in her chest. She nodded slowly, turned, and walked back to the house. That was the beginning of the unspoken gestures, the quiet acts of observation and care that communicated far more than any grand, poetic declaration ever could. The next week, Jessie was attempting to string a particularly difficult corner brace. The barbed wire slipped from the tensioner, the heavy steel coil snapping back with vicious speed. The barbs tore across his left forearm, slicing through his shirt and leaving a long, bleeding gash. He wrapped his kerchief tightly around the wound. When he came to the back porch that evening to return the water jug, Ada was standing there. She saw the blood-soaked kerchief. She did not gasp. She did not fuss. "Sit down on the step," she ordered. Jessie hesitated, then obeyed. Ada disappeared into the house and returned with a basin of hot water, a clean linen cloth, and a bottle of strong-smelling carbolic salve. She knelt beside him on the wooden boards. She did not ask for permission. She simply unknotted the ruined kerchief, took his heavy, calloused arm in her hands, and began to clean the wound. Her touch was firm, capable, and entirely practical. Jessie watched her hands. He watched the careful, focused expression on her face. He felt the sting of the hot water and the sharp bite of the salve, but he did not flinch. He was overwhelmed by the sudden, intense proximity of her. The smell of her hair, the faint scent of lavender soap and chalk dust. He realized, with a slow, heavy certainty, that he did not want to be anywhere else in the world but sitting on this porch, bleeding, while she tended to him. "You need a new shirt," Ada said quietly, her eyes focused entirely on the wound. "It will mend," Jessie replied, his voice rougher than usual. "The fabric is rotten, Mr. Cole. It will tear again." She finished binding the arm with a clean strip of white cotton, tied the knot securely, and sat back. She looked up at him. Their faces were very close in the gathering dusk. "Thank you," Jessie said. "Keep it clean," Ada instructed, standing up quickly and taking the basin. She went inside and closed the door. 2 days later, Jessie found a neatly folded package wrapped in brown paper sitting on the stump where he normally ate his lunch. Inside was a brand new work shirt, heavy blue cotton, solidly stitched. He held it in his hands for a long time, running his thumb over the seams. He wore it the next day. He did not thank her out loud, and she did not ask if it fit. The wearing of it was the thanks. The seeing of it was the acknowledgement. The conversations between them slowly grew longer, evolving from the purely practical into the quietly personal. They argued about minor, trivial things. They argued about whether chickens possessed any measurable intelligence. They argued about the best way to cure a cast-iron skillet. They argued about the necessity of learning Latin in a town that barely spoke proper English. It was a form of banter, a careful, intellectual sparring that served as a substitute for flirtation. Ada realized, with a growing sense of wonder, that Jesse Cole was the first man she had ever met who actually listened. When she spoke, he stopped what he was doing. He looked directly at her. He considered her words before he formulated a response. He did not wait for his turn to speak. He genuinely wanted to know what she thought. 6 weeks. The fence was finally finished. It stood like a monument across the eastern ridge, tight, straight, and unyielding. Jesse spent his final morning cleaning his tools, organizing his bedroll, and preparing to leave. He had his money. He had no reason to stay. The thought of walking down that dusty road, of putting miles between himself and the whitewashed house under the cottonwood trees, felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He was a man who moved. He had always moved. But now, the idea of motion felt entirely wrong. Thomas Hale found him by the barn. The old man looked at the packed saddlebags, looked at the finished fence stretching into the distance, and sighed heavily. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "It is a good fence, Jesse," Thomas said quietly. "It will hold," Jesse agreed. Thomas looked down at his boots. "I am an old man. I am stubborn, and I am used to managing things. I managed the cattle, I managed the land, and I tried to manage my daughter. I overstepped my authority with her. I know that. She has reminded me of it every day for 3 years." Thomas looked up, his eyes suddenly fierce and uncompromising. "I overstepped my authority, Jesse, but I did not overstep my judgment. I told you that first day you would make a fine husband for her. I was right then, and I am right now. You are a steady man. You are a solid man. You are the only man who ever listened to her instead of talking at her." Jesse stood perfectly still. He felt the blood pounding in his ears. "She is at the schoolhouse," Thomas said, turning away. "She is staying late today to clean the chalkboards. You have your pay. You are free to walk down that road and never come back. Or you can walk into town." The old man walked into the barn, leaving Jesse alone in the dust. Jesse did not look at the road heading out of town. He did not look at his saddlebags. He left them sitting by the barn door. He turned and began the 4-mile walk into Redbend. He walked with a singular, terrifying purpose. He did not notice the heat. He did not notice the dust. He only saw the image of Ada, sitting on the porch, wrapping his arm. Ada, holding the iron coffee pot. Ada, arguing with him about the intelligence of chickens. The schoolhouse was a small, square building at the edge of town, painted white, with a small bell tower on the roof. The door was open to let in the afternoon breeze. Jesse walked up the wooden steps. His boots sounded impossibly loud on the floorboards. He stepped into the room. Ada was standing near the front of the classroom, an eraser in her hand, wiping down the large slate board. The room smelled strongly of chalk dust and old paper. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the large east window. Ada had once told him, during one of their quiet lunches, that the east window was specifically hers. It was the window that caught the morning light when she arrived, and the window that threw long, beautiful shadows across the wooden desks when she left. She heard his boots and turned. She froze, the eraser still in her hand. A cloud of fine white chalk dust drifted down around her skirt. She looked at him. She looked at the blue shirt she had bought him. She looked at the intense, focused expression on his face. She knew the fence was finished. She knew he was supposed to be gone. Jesse took off his hat. He held it in both hands, his fingers gripping the brim tightly. He walked slowly down the center aisle between the rows of empty wooden desks until he was standing 10 feet away from her. He stopped. He looked at her, standing in the golden light of the east window. "The fence is finished," Jesse said. His voice was low, rough, and entirely devoid of poetry. "I know," Ada replied. Her voice was barely a whisper. She did not move. Jesse took a deep breath. He was not a man of many words. He did not know how to craft a beautiful speech. He only knew how to build things that were solid, things that would last. He looked directly into her eyes. "I am a slow man, Ada," Jesse said, the words coming out deliberately, carrying the heavy weight of absolute truth. "I am slow to realize things. I have spent my whole life walking from one place to another, looking for work, looking for something that felt like it wouldn't wash away in the first hard rain. I took the job from your father because I needed the money. I agreed to stay away from you because you asked me to, and I respected your boundaries." He took one step closer. "But I am done walking," Jesse continued, his voice steadying, gaining strength. "I do not want to walk down that road. I want to sit on your porch. I want to argue with you about books I haven't read. I want to fix the latch on your kitchen door. I want to wake up and see you making coffee." He paused, his grip on his hat turning his knuckles white. Your father was a meddling fool to say what he said to me that first day. But he was right. I am asking for permission to stay, Ada. Not as a hired hand. As a man who wants to court you. As a man who intends to marry you, if you will have me. The silence in the schoolroom was absolute. The dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight. The distant sound of a dog barking in the town seemed miles away. Ada stood perfectly still. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at this tall, quiet, solid man. She looked at the calluses on his hands, the steady, unwavering devotion in his eyes. She thought of the merchant, the rancher, the clerk. They had all offered her a position. Jesse Cole was offering her a partnership. He was offering her himself, plainly and honestly. She slowly lowered the eraser to the wooden tray beneath the chalkboard. She dusted her hands on her apron. She walked toward him, closing the distance between them until she was standing close enough to smell the sun on his clothes. She looked up into his face. "It took you long enough," Ada said quietly. A slow, genuine smile broke across Jesse's face, softening the hard lines of his jaw, lighting up his eyes. "It was a beautiful, rare thing." "I told you," Jesse murmured. "I am a slow man." Ada reached out and gently rested her hand against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of it beneath the blue cotton shirt. "You got here," she said softly. "That is what matters." The courtship was entirely unconventional, much to the quiet amusement of the town of Redbend. There were no formal parlor visits, no stilted conversations over tea. Their courtship consisted of shared labor and shared silences. Jesse took over the heavy work of the ranch, managing the small herd of cattle, repairing the barn roof, fixing every broken hinge and loose floorboard he could find. Ada continued to teach. On Sundays, they walked together along the eastern ridge, following the straight, unyielding line of the fence Jesse had built. They talked about the future. They talked about real things, practical things, building a foundation of mutual respect and quiet, profound affection. They were married in the late autumn, just before the first frost hardened the ground. The ceremony took place in the small, whitewashed church in Redbend. It was not a grand affair. The entire town attended, filling the wooden pews, functioning as a collective, a proving chorus to a union that simply made perfect sense. Ada wore a dress of deep, rich burgundy wool, simple and elegant, holding a small bouquet of dried prairie flowers. Jesse wore a new black suit, looking uncomfortable in the stiff collar but incredibly handsome. When the preacher asked for the vows, Jesse did not hesitate. He spoke his promises clearly, loudly, his eyes never leaving Ada's face. When he kissed her, it was a solid, grounding promise, a seal upon a life they were choosing to build together. Thomas Hale sat in the front pew, leaning heavily on his cane, a look of profound, smug satisfaction on his weathered face. 7 years later, 1891. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of impending rain. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the vast Texas sky in brilliant strokes of orange and bruised purple. Jesse Cole sat on the back porch of the whitewashed house, his boots resting on the wooden railing. He was older now, the lines around his eyes a little deeper, his hands still heavily calloused from the daily labor of a prosperous ranch. He held a tin cup of coffee in his hand, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. The screen door creaked open behind him. Ada stepped out onto the porch. She moved with the same capable grace, her hair still pulled back, though a few strands of silver now threaded through the dark brown. She carried a basket of mending. She sat down in the wooden rocking chair beside him, pulling a needle and a spool of heavy thread from her pocket. From the direction of the barn, the sound of childish laughter rang out. A boy of 6, with Jesse's quiet, observant eyes, was chasing a little girl of 4 who possessed Ada's fierce, determined jaw around the side of the corral. Jesse watched them for a moment, a deep, quiet contentment settling over him. He took a sip of his coffee. He looked over at Ada. She was focused on her mending, her needle flashing in the fading light. "I checked the eastern fence line today," Jesse said casually. Ada did not look up from her work. "And?" "It's still standing straight," Jesse said, a faint note of pride in his voice. "Not a single post leaning." Ada finally looked up. She met his eyes, a familiar, affectionate spark of amusement dancing in her gaze. "It should be," she replied dryly. "You spent 6 weeks digging those holes. If that fence falls down before the turn of the century, I will be deeply disappointed in your work ethic, Mr. Cole." Jesse chuckled, a low, rumbling sound in his chest. He reached over and gently rested his hand over hers, stilling the needle. He looked at her, really looked at her, feeling the same profound surge of love that he had felt standing in the dusty schoolroom 7 years ago. "It will hold, Ada," Jesse said softly. "I built it to hold." Ada turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. She squeezed his hand tightly. "I know you did," she said. They sat together in the gathering twilight, listening to the sounds of their children, watching the stars begin to prick through the darkening sky, entirely complete in the shared, comfortable silence of a life well built. That is the beautiful, enduring truth about the quiet spaces between people. We are so often conditioned to expect the grand gesture, the dramatic declaration in the pouring rain, the fiery clash of opposing wills. We look for the loud, undeniable proof of affection. But true intimacy, the kind that weathers the hardpan dirt and the fierce winds of a long life, is rarely loud. It is found in the simple, profound act of paying attention. It is found in the mended shirt, the shared cup of coffee, the willingness to simply listen without waiting for a turn to speak. It is found in the steady, unglamorous work of building something solid, day by day, post by post, until you have created a boundary that protects and nurtures the love within it. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is to stop walking, to stand still in the afternoon light, and to speak the plain, unvarnished truth. Thank you for riding with me today. I am grateful you were here to share this journey into the quiet corners of the past. Until next time, keep riding.